again, back in the bag again. Whoa, whoa, yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to the Splash City Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hartman, and this is your go-to basketball podcast where we're diving deep into the game of hoops and the teams that matter most right here in the land of 10,000 lakes. Before we tip off today's episode, make sure you take a minute, follow Splash City Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts like Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. You can even listen on your connected device. Got a great show today. We'll talk a little bit about the transfer portal for Minnesota and St. Thomas in men's basketball. I also have a conversation with director of the West Central United AAU program out of Alexandria. Andrew joins me on today's show to talk about the program, talk about travel, talk about everything going on with spring AAU seasons. Before we get to that, I wanted to briefly just talk about the Timberwolves Game 5 loss in Denver last night. Tough one, down two starters, first full game. You could tell Denver came ready to go. Elimination game for them at home. They weren't going to go down without a fight. Unfortunately for the Timberwolves, turnovers were the story here. 25 turnovers in the game. Just could never really get into a rhythm. Basically, 1 out of 4 possessions ended in a turnover, which leads to easy baskets, transition, and rhythm for the Nuggets. Really important stat. Spencer Jones and Cam Johnson combined for 38 points. So definitely the role players found a rhythm in Denver last night. And then Minnesota couldn't set up their defense because they're playing in transition so much, getting cross-matched, just had a tough time getting into that suffocating defense that they've been playing. Jaden McDaniels, 2 quick fouls. Of course, that hurts as well. And overall, probably Rudy Gobert's worst game of the series. And, Jokic, I think getting his 16 assists was key because there have been games where he was closer to, single digits. There was a game he finished with 3 assists. So the fact that the Wolves kind of ended up chasing Jokic, passing the ball around, moving the ball, you could tell Cam Johnson getting much more involved, getting downhill. So we'll see how the Wolves adjust to that. One thing I thought of today following the game was about more maybe Io Julius Randle pick and roll. I know Rudy's a great screen setter, but getting Io downhill, having a lob threat like Rudy in the dunker spot, and then having someone like Julius who can play that short roll a little better and facilitate getting him the ball on the move or in some space versus having to post up at the elbow, try to work his way down on the dribble, just as a way to maybe clean up some of those turnovers. I think might be an opportunity. TJ Shannon, he played a little more last night, but I think a lot of fans were hoping to see more of him in this game. Ayo Dosunmu obviously comes back to earth a little bit, though didn't play bad, just not his 43 points. So the Wolves are definitely going to need more Jaden, Naz, and Julius in game 6. Really pivot, probably the most important game, right? Timberwolves have to treat that like a game 7. You do not want to go back to Denver, especially without your closer, without Ant. That's crucial. So I think the energy Thursday night at Target Center should be awesome. Chance to close out the Nuggets. We'll see how the game goes. I mean, I'm a little curious on the Mike Conley minutes, Kyle Anderson minutes. I think Finch, I will say, in game 5, to me, felt like he was feeling it out. He knew there was a game to be, obviously you want to win every game and you want to close it out as soon as you can. But I do think there was an element of, let's see what we got. Let's see who's playing well. Let's see who can run the defensive game plan, who can make the right reads and rotations. And then for game 6, we'll tighten that up and we'll be really deliberate about our substitution patterns. So I think that's the adjustment the Wolves will make, is lock in a little bit on who's playing, what the matchups are. Denver threw everything out. Like, we hadn't seen Tyus Jones and Valanciunas for games, and they came in and actually provided some good minutes. Valanciunas finished with 9 points and was definitely in there to set the tone and the physicality. But the Wolves just didn't attack the paint enough to punish the Nuggets for that. So I think there'll be some adjustments on both ends of the court, and the benches were opened up big time last night, and I expect that to get a little tighter Thursday in Game 6 in Minneapolis. But all that being said, let's get into the rest of the show. Andrew from West Central United and Gopher St. Thomas transfer portal updates. This is the Splash City Basketball Podcast. All right, I'm excited to have Andrew Wiener from the West Central United AAU program out of Alexandria, Minnesota, with me today to talk a little bit about his program and, of course, AAU basketball in general. And Andrew, thanks a lot for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to kind of shed some light on some of the mystery of AAU basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely growing. We were talking a little bit ago about how it felt very exclusive. Like, hey, you had to be really elite players. And I think one of the nice things that I've seen change over the years is it's kind of just for anybody who wants to get better and just provides more opportunities to play. And I think that's just a great thing, right? Like expanding the game of basketball is just good in general.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with someone last weekend about how there's obviously levels to everything, and the high level teams are for those more elite players, but now there are all these teams that if you're a lower level player, you just want to get better, you just want some game experience. There are teams that will fit that, and there's definitely a market for it. And I think it's good for growing the game for sure.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about, I had this conversation with another parent the other day about like distance and travel, like you guys being in Alexandria, greater Minnesota.
Yeah.
There's not as many programs out there. I know there's a few, but like as far as logistical things, travel, not just for tournaments, but travel for practice. How do you guys kind of approach that with kids who are reaching out, and what do you tell them or tell the parents, I guess, probably more so about like what's that travel going to look like, and make it so it's not as daunting as it may seem initially.
Yeah, so obviously the first thing is we tell people it is a big commitment. It just is, and so they have to be ready for that. Over the years, we've kind of we've modified things how we do practice to try to accommodate people. We
Hmm.
used to practice in Alexandria exclusive. Now, a lot of our on the boys' side, a lot of our teams will practice in Perham. Perham seems to be kind of like a good midpoint, Fergus Falls, some other places like that where we'll practice. So we'll actually go meet the players kind of where they are. Um, and that's worked out really well. That's allowed us to kind of expand our reach further north. Um, and so that's one thing that we've done. We originally we would practice twice a week. We bumped that to just a little bit longer practice once a week. That makes life a little bit easier for those traveling long distances. So yeah, we've over the years we've just kind of chipped away and seen what works, what doesn't work, and kept making improvements that way.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
how do you work with your coaches then on that as well? Are they more, is it kind of dependent, like maybe they live closer to that Detroit Lakes Perham area, or do they travel from Alec, and does that even play into it? Because I'm sure a lot of young coaches will coach wherever they can, right?
That we're I'm really, really lucky to have a really this year especially. I tell my group of coaches we have a text thread, and I text them, you know, several times a week, just saying how lucky I am to have this group of coaches. They are from kind of all over. Fargo Moorhead area, a couple from Alexandria, just kind of spread out in that area. Wadena, we have a coach from the Wadena area, and they're all just kind of willing to go wherever it needs to be. But again, the Perham, Fergus Falls, New York Mills, like wherever we can
Mhm.
find a gym kind of up in that area, seems to work pretty well for everybody. So everybody does a really good job of adjusting. And um and one interesting thing about kind of those more northern players, I had a parent tell me when you live kind of in that northwestern part of the state, long travel is just part of life. It's just what it
Yeah.
is. You want to go to a mall, you got like you got to drive. You want to go anywhere, you have to drive. And so it's where it might seem crazy for someone in the Twin Cities, because they have everything relatively close. It's just kind of part of life for those northern families.
Yeah, I mean, growing up out there, I know I tell people, yeah, I had to go an hour to go to like a decent movie theater in Alexandria, and it's like, wow, that's
Right.
crazy. So, I totally get it. And then like part of that too, there's a lot of pride in greater Minnesota, right? Like the quote unquote outstate kids, and like when you compete against the city kids, that's always like a big thing. Do you play that up a little bit with your program? Do you kind of talk about that, or do they kids kind of come with that chip a little bit?
I think they bring it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll see some of that like at the state tournament. You'll see high school coaches talk about that, when you have a small school or an outstate school go play the bigger schools or the Twin Cities schools during the
Mm-hmm.
state tournament. You'll hear some of those pep talks. We carry some of that over. Not so much as a program. We do obviously target outstate players because that's just where we are.
Mm-hmm.
But from coach to coach, you might get, like I said, a pep talk here and there about like, hey, let's go take it to these guys and show them the outstate can play and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. It's a little different now because we're starting to get so many players from the Fargo Moorhead area. Um, with larger schools, they're not they're not really intimidated anymore uh by the competition down in the Twin Cities or beyond. So, um,
Right.
but it is great. It is great to have those 1A, 2A schools, players from those schools come and compete against the 4A guys, and see what they can do.
Yeah, I think there's like the awe of some of it that it used to be before a lot of this happened. Now I think kids are so used to playing against other kids and bigger kids and 4A schools and all that. Maybe it's not as big a deal to these kids nowadays as it maybe was, for old people like me.
Yeah, when I was in high school, we'd go down to the city. We played, so I went to Alexandria. We played Minneapolis North once a year. We had a kind of a home and home situation. And that was always, playing a team from Minneapolis, and, our eyes would get big. Like, how can we compete? Well, we beat them. They came to our place and we beat them. And then kind of the mystique of it all kind of wore away, and we're like, all right, if you can play, you can play regardless
Hmm.
of where you're from and all that. So, um, that was kind of one example, but now like you said, kids play all over the place year round. And so it's just, nobody's really scared anymore, which is great.
Yeah, yeah, agree. Let's talk a little bit more just in general about your program, your philosophies, how it started. Maybe we could start there. Um, is this something that, just always passionate about the game and started, and like what year and how did you kind of get all started with your West Central United?
Sure. So I was a very mediocre player in high school. I played at some junior college. I played 2 years of junior college at Rainy River. So
Hmm.
speaking of being way up north, that's right on the
Yep.
border of Canada. So I played for a couple of years there. And then went to St. Cloud State for the second 2 years of my college. And while I was there, um, Chris Lewis, who runs the Minnesota Comets, they're out of St. Cloud. He asked me if I wanted to referee just for a little some side money, basically.
Yeah.
And I started refereeing. And then around that time, he became the varsity coach at Foley. And kind of, it's so long ago, I don't remember the exact timing, but basically he asked me if I wanted to assist. What was it? It was the assistant coach for the 9th grade Foley Falcons.
Okay.
And so I jumped on that, and then he asked if I wanted to coach a Comets team. And I did. Did those things for a couple of years. And that I kind of got the coaching bug from that.
Hmm.
And went off, continued my schooling. When I finally moved back to Alexandria, where I'm from, and there was nothing really in this area. The Comets were in St. Cloud, which is a little bit of a stretch for some players around here. So
Hmm.
just started something. We had one team. We had 9 players that first year, and it's just kind of slowly built up. And now we've got 2 teams per grade, starting in 6th grade all the way up. We've got 14 teams on the girls' side, and it's just kind of slowly built into something that's pretty cool, pretty near and dear to me for sure.
That's awesome. You're like the third guest I've had that has a couple of years or at least a couple of years of refereeing, and I think that's like a really important element, right, to coaching.
I
See the
just
other side.
I think it was last weekend or 2 weeks ago, I made a comment to a ref. He seemed to be having a hard day. And just, I kind of made the comment. I said, I've refed plenty. I get it. Like, don't worry about it. I get it. And
Yeah.
so it does give you a little bit of insight, when you want to get after a ref a little bit, just having that experience, like, all right, give him a break.
Right. You mentioned your coaches earlier about how lucky you are with this group of coaches. Curious, like how much do you provide and guidance on like this is the style we want to play, or do you give them like full autonomy, like your team, I'll let you, if you want to be a trapping team, if you want to be man-to-man pressure, like whatever it is, like how much do you kind of work with your coaches on the style of play?
It's a really good question, because it's something that comes up every year as we get new coaches. We have a kind of a general way that we like to play program wide, but which, broad things. So on our, you mentioned earlier about our, on our website, it says we like to play the right way. We don't like just rolling the ball out and saying, go get them. We don't love dribbling the air out of the ball. We don't love, just guarding our guy and don't worry about what happens. Just don't let your guy score. We don't love that. And I think a lot of people think there's a right way and a wrong way to play team basketball and good basketball. I reference the Spurs, kind of the early 2000s Spurs a lot when I'm talking to my teams, and just how that ball would just it would just move, and it's impossible to defend. And so that's kind of, as an umbrella for our whole program. We move the ball with the pass, not the dribble. Kind of cliche, all those cliches, but they're cliches for a reason. So that's kind of the overarching style, but I do give coaches a lot of autonomy as far as, coaching to your personnel, not just your style as a coach. If you got the athletes to, run and press and do all these things, then by all means. If you're big and slow, well then figure out a style that fits that. And we've had plenty of both over the years, and so our coaches do a really good job, and we kind of get together, and there's a meeting of the minds about with each of the teams, what do we want to do? So I have a pretty good insight as far as what all the coaches are doing from year to year, but not to I don't want to be too, I don't want to take the fun away from that. Everybody's got fun ideas about what they want to do when they coach a team, so I let them explore that.
You mentioned the early 2000 Spurs. Do the kids understand what that is? Like, do you have to pull up the YouTube videos?
Exactly. They do when I'm done with them.
Okay.
I love, I'll send, I'll get on a group text with my players and send YouTube clips, and it's got classical music in the background, because it's just like the beautiful
poetic
game, right?
Yeah,
poetic. And so that's the idea. I have stolen who knows how many plays from Greg Popovich and put in as a part of what we do. And it's more fun. And I think the kids once they start to get the hang of it, they agree that it's a really fun style. The ball moves, you play faster that way. Everybody's involved. And it's, I just think it's a great style.
Yeah. I would guess you're a little bit of an outlier. Like I see a lot of ball dominant team, like, a couple guys, probably mimicking, some of the NBA stuff that you see. And I think like the Timberwolves are a great example. When they're playing well, the ball moves. And when it's in Ant and Julius's hands and it kind of gets pounded too much, then they kind of get bogged down. And it's obvious to a lot of us, and it's just hard to see, like, watch teams struggle with that. But I would imagine there's lots of just pick and roll and a lot of AAU games nowadays.
A lot. And part of that is part of that's coaching. A lot of it's just kind of players being players. Coaches can, a lot of those times when you see a ball dominant player and he's just dribbling the air out of it, if you look at the sideline, it's not what the coach is wanting necessarily.
Right.
But you have players. My 16U team right now, we've got at least 3 players that are just, I can't even imagine. When I was in high school, if I was playing against these guys, it would have been so embarrassing because kids have gotten so skilled and they're so
Yeah.
much more athletic and they're in the weight room more and they're just, dunking is like if you're 5'10" or above and you can't dunk, it's embarrassing now. So you'd have a 6'5" guy back when I was in high school. It makes me sound old. I'm not that old, but that's how much the game has changed
Yeah.
in a short time. As you were 6'5", you could dunk and it was a big deal. Now it's just commonplace. And so kids have gotten so good. It's hard not to let them just kind of go and create.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a time and place for both.
Sure.
When you got the guys that can do it.
Yeah. I noticed that in the state tournament too. How many young kids were like really comfortable and making big shots, and the amount of sophomores and juniors. Like generally, you think of those older teams with seniors, like a group of 7 or 8 seniors leading that team to state. And I was like, most of these guys are sophomores and juniors. They're just so good at such a young age and skilled, and 6'5" kids shooting threes left and right. It's just wild. So
Well, as well as anyone, Steph Curry changed basketball forever.
yeah.
And then with all the analytics and everything that came with that, effective field goal percentage and all these things,
Mm-hmm.
points per possession and all the math that comes with it now.
Yeah.
But so kids, I tell my players all the time, when you close out on shooters, if you can just assume if a player gets a 3 off, you can kind of assume it's gonna go in. So when we guard, we're kind of guarding with that in the back of our minds that I can't even let this guy get a shot off from 3 because
Right.
kids are so good from that distance now. It's really incredible.
It's funny, like watching games with, I don't know if your parents are like this, but like my dad would be like, oh, like they, you know, look at that bad closeout. He just flew by him. And I'm like, I think that's by design. I think they're trying to run guys off the line, force them to put it on the deck because they're less comfortable. And it's just, it's such a foreign concept for even me from, playing, coaching even 10, 15 years ago. But now that is like right, like a design of you want to like come out, contest every 3. And if you get beat, you get beat, and you just work on rotations.
Yeah. And it is such a change in style. My dad would coach. He assisted me for several years, and his style was he's very old school. We shouldn't even be shooting threes. We should let the other team shoot threes. And he adjusted the more we would talk about it, he would kind of adjust to the stylistically, but there's very much a kind of a disconnect in, I guess, age and style and era. It's so different. It's so different. And even since I've been coaching it's been in the last 5 years or less where that flyby closeout has kind of become the thing. We would always talk about, short choppy steps with, both hands up. And, that's what college coaches were all about, was the squeaky shoes. And it's still important, but when you got a 3-point shooter now, it's just try to run them off the line any way you can.
Yeah. You were talking about the Spurs teams and showing videos. My son hates me because I've literally talked about Hakeem Olajuwon for like the last 2 weeks because we were debating. Yeah, we were debating Rudy Gobert amongst the greatest defensive players of all time, and I think my last podcast maybe. But I was like, Hakeem Olajuwon, like, do people even know? They talk about Chet Holmgren and even Wemby obviously being 7'5" or whatever. But I'm like, Hakeem was 7 feet, hitting fadeaway baseline jumpers, ball handling, spin moves, blocking 3 shots a game. I mean, he was unbelievable. And yeah, my son is like, yeah, I've already seen this clip, Dad.
You
Thanks.
can have a whole podcast about Hakeem Olajuwon. I mean, you can have a whole episode about that guy. I am squarely with you. I think he's even better than Shaq just because he could make free throws and make shots further than 8 feet from the hoop.
Yeah. And beat him head to head in the finals.
And he beat him head to head. Well, Shaq was young. I think it was his rookie year. But we'll get. Shaq has obviously changed basketball forever. But no, I'm with you. Olajuwon was, and then you also know, I mean, we're getting way off into different territory. But when the guys like Kobe and LeBron and all these guys are going to Olajuwon to learn footwork, it tells you all you kind of need to know about how great that guy was.
That's a great topic to bring up, because that's one of the things that I feel like the skill on some things is really elevated, but I do think there's some nuances to the game that maybe have suffered or gone backwards. And I'd say footwork is maybe one of them. Maybe it's because they don't call as many travels, like the step through. That's a big thing, right? And I feel like that used to get called as a travel all the time, and now it doesn't. So like, do you see that? And like, how does that, with coaching or even just watching AAU, like what is the footwork situation?
I feel like, so all these kind of old school things, the old school, fundies, as I call them to my guys, but the fundamentals are timeless. We talk about playing off 2 feet, and I know that's kind of a cliche too, but all these cliches are they're cliches for a reason. Playing off 2 feet makes you so dangerous. And I've got a player right now who's just a phenomenal basketball player, and among all of his attributes, probably his best attribute is his footwork. Really, really great soccer player also. And I think that has a lot to do with how he controls his body and his feet. But he'll get in traffic, he'll be surrounded by a whole team, and just, there's no panic, and there's just, the pivots and the reverse pivots and the step throughs and all these things. And it really separates him from other ultra athletic, good basketball players, is that he's also got these great feet. And creative too. Creative with, it's pivoting sounds boring when you're teaching it to like fourth graders. You can be creative with it too. And I think Kobe impacted the game really, a great deal when it came to those sorts of fundamentals. And so kids who pay attention to that can kind of separate themselves, I think. But yeah, there are a lot of kids that come out and they just want to use, speed and quickness and maybe a good handle to just, to try to dominate. But that'll only take you so far, because there's always someone out there who's better. So yeah, those fundamentals, that footwork is incredibly important. Always will be.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there's a lot of the moves that kids make now where they hold the ball further out with two hands, they're lengthening and doing things like that, and they get to the rim of 1 foot and they get a little bump and they miss. And so like knowing when to do that and when not to, we've talked a lot about with our group, we have 6th graders, and there's a lot of like decision making, like, quick decisions, but then also those kinds of decisions. Like, am I good to go off 1? Should I go off 2 for better balance here? Am I going to get bumped? Like all those decision-making things have become, because I don't know, maybe the game's just faster, and that's part of it, is you just have to make decisions so much faster.
Yeah, that I totally agree. I think if kids can, they have all this technology now and all these training tools. Our whole conversation sounds like we're like 80 years old, right? But it's true, like how much has changed in the game, and how there's I forget what they're called, but those light up cones that they'll light up a different color, and based on that color you make a different decision. The decision, I think, pods or whatever they're called. But the decision making is everything. Whether it's in the pick and roll, there's 100 different things you can do off of a ball screen. All these things. And so it's really interesting. And also the expansion of training, individual basketball trainers has become such a big thing, because now you've got, kids are working, the kids who put that work in, they are working on things like footwork. The good trainers are working on decision making. The good trainers are working on, you drive into the hoop, how can you protect the ball? There's, all the different pickups that are taught now. It's really interesting because these are all things that really good players have always done, but now they're actually being, back when you might say, well, that guy's just a really good player, and you couldn't really define what made them good. They just scored a lot of points and they just always knew what they were doing. Well, now it's being broken down into, they're putting names to all these moves and all these movements, which is really interesting. Same with teaching the jump shot or just shooting mechanics. It's been broken down so scientifically and analytically now, where anybody can, if you put the time in, anybody can become a really good shooter, because there is essentially a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Yeah. I'm interested in like the training aspect of it. You guys don't do any specifically at your, but I'm assuming there are some in Alexandria, correct?
Yeah. And I actually I run a gym here. We have
okay.
a training facility here called the Hoops District. And we have a bunch of really good basketball players usually from the Alexandria area, who come and use it. And we've got some trainers there who do a really good job. And we've got the shooting machines that, in my opinion, is the greatest invention since the light bulb. I think the shooting machines, regardless of brand, they're all unbelievable. Because you can get 100 shots up in 7 minutes. And go and shoot outside by yourself. How long would it take you to chase down your own rebound?
Yeah.
Go back and shoot. So it's really a great thing for kids to get a bunch of shots up quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the one thing and this could just be a problem, not a problem, I would say, an experience that I've noticed is that some of the skill level is really high, but the playing in the group can suffer if you're not mixing both, right? Like you definitely need both, because, I see a lot of kids will do, they'll have all the handles, but they're not getting anywhere. They're not creating an advantage, but it looks really good. And then they get frustrated that they're like, well, I can beat my cones in the gym when I'm working with my trainer. Like, why can't I do this in a game? Right. So there's like this blend that they have to have of playing with other humans and then also working on those skills.
For sure. And I think that's where game experience and things like AAU come into play, where if you want to really, really be good, and I'm a huge fan of playing lots of different sports. I don't think anybody should specialize, maybe in later years, but play lots of sports. But if you want to be really, really good, I think you got to have both. You've got to have that training with someone who knows what they're talking about. Right? We don't want trainers who are just teaching you the 55 dribble combinations, where you're trying to break the ankles of a cone. Well, great. Or even if you break the ankles, of a defender. Well, in real basketball, there's going to be 3 other guys in the lane that you got to deal with.
Right.
And so you need good training, and there are some really good trainers out there. And you need good training, and then you need to go work on the stuff you learn in training. Go apply it to your games on the weekend. And so you need both. You need that game experience too.
Yeah, for sure. Anything you want to plug related to West Central United? Where are you guys playing this weekend? Website, how to get a hold of you? Anything else?
Yeah. So, website's westcentralunited.com. Very, very original.
Easy to find.
Easy to find. Yeah. We're on social media. We're on Instagram and X and all these things. I would say any kid who's in outstate Minnesota, just give us a look. And I think kids who play with us really enjoy it. We have really, over the years, again, it makes me feel old, but we've been doing it for 15 years. And with a lot of programs that are kind of, they just they pop up and then they disappear. we've had some staying power, and there's benefits to that. We know what we're doing, and there are a lot of programs like that have stuck around and know what they're doing. But outstate specifically, I think anybody who's interested should definitely give us a look. We do, like everyone, or about everyone, we do tryouts in March. Our season usually runs April till beginning of June, and then usually a couple events in July. Yeah, and then other than that, we've also got here in Alexandria. If anyone's watching this in Alexandria, we've got the Hoops District, which is a really cool 24-hour training facility that allows kids to a secure facility, so people can come in anytime. Parents can drop kids off, and they can get a good workout in real quick. And it's just a cool space.
Yeah. We talk about Minnesota. Well, I don't, but people talk about Minnesota as like the state of hockey, right? But I still will highly advocate that the state of hoops is very strong here. And yeah, there's a lot of northern towns. You talked about Rainy River, Rainy Lake. Like, yeah, a lot of hockey up there, but man, you get into some of those rural parts of Minnesota, and basketball is huge. And Alexandria, I know, has a great hockey culture, but that girls and boys basketball program there is really good, and there's a lot of good programs around the area. Quick question for you. What's
Sure.
like the farthest someone is traveling right now? Do we got any War Road kids coming down to Alec to play, or what do you got?
Close. We've got, let me think about this. Right now, we've got a couple players coming from Newfoldland.
I've heard of it.
It's a co-op school, and they're called the Northern Freeze.
Oh, sure.
How far north they are. But we got a couple guys that come from up there. We've had Thief River Falls. We've had some kids from Red Lake County. So we get up there a little bit, but yeah, right now Newfoldland is the furthest north that I can think of.
And then I'm assuming down past, like, do you get down to Wilmer? Any kids from Wilmer area or New London up that way, or? Yeah,
occasionally New London. We've had a bunch of kids from New London. Occasionally we'll get a Wilmer kid. We've really, since we started practicing a little bit further north, we've really got, it's kind of focused in that northwestern corner of the state, and then also kind of the border, some of the border towns in North Dakota as well. So
sure. Okay. Well, awesome. This was great. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom. And it sounds like we could go back to and doing some 90s, early 2000s stories here.
So I don't know if you've seen on social media, there's so much stuff right now. There's a guy or several guys that talk about elite ball knowledge, and then they just drop random names of basketball players that are unknown. And I can't help myself. I go on and I post random names on there just because it's like, I don't know why that's so fun or nostalgic, but it's that 90s era is so great.
It is. I mean, it was. I know it's. We do these lists and they talk about players from different eras, and I'm like, man, each era is its own thing, and whether it was Bird, Magic, or Jordan, Stockton, Malone, like, we had a coach actually this year who's kind of like, I don't really like pick and roll, and I'm thinking, dude, this has been the play in basketball for like 50 years. Like, it's the most repeatable like thing to do, and just there's so many things from the game that can be taken even in those eras, like the 90s, obviously very physical, low scoring, and so we were debating on who's the best offensive player ever and where Jokic ranks in that, and it's like in the 90s you had scores of like 83 to 80. Now it's like 120 to 115. Like, how do you compare who's better offensive player based on that, right?
It's funny you say that. It's so interesting because there's so many great scorers in that era, but the final game scores were so low, which actually makes it even more impressive when a guy like Allen Iverson scores 40, but his team only scored 89 points. It's but yeah, those sorts of guys going back in the 90s, early 2000s, obviously biased because that's when we grew up, right? But that was the height of NBA basketball, I think.
Yeah. And you were talking about the Spurs. I think like the Warriors were that way a few years ago, right? Like the ball just doesn't stick. And I think that the Spurs today, you can still feel Popovich's presence on that team, the way they play. And so there's still a lot of teams doing it and, kind of playing quote unquote the right way.
Yeah.
And, the Nuggets kind of can be that way too to watch. I mean, number one offense in the league. So, yeah,
Well, hopefully not on Thursday.
Hopefully not on Thursday, man. I know it took me everything to not, I'm trying to like take a break from the Wolves just today and tomorrow so I can kind of get my head right after last night. I've been staying up till, yeah. I mean, these 1 a.m. bedtimes are not helping. I'll tell you that much.
I know. I wish they would start a game at a regular, can we get a 7 p.m. tip off would be great, but it's worth it.
Thursday at 8, maybe. We'll maybe get an 8 o'clock. We'll have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew. Well, I appreciate you coming on and best of luck the rest of the spring and summer with the season.
I appreciate it.
In today's final segment, I wanted to touch briefly on the transfer portal and news for the major men's programs in the Twin Cities and Minnesota. That would be the Minnesota Golden Gophers and St. Thomas Tommies. Let's start with the Gophers. They're coming off an 8-12 Big Ten season, finishing in the Big Ten. And they return actually a fairly strong core, which I think speaks to Nico Medved's ability to not only just recruit in general, but you got to, in this day and age, recruit your own players. So they are returning Isaac Osama, Bobby Durkin, Jalen Crocker-Johnson, Grayson Grove, and Kai Shinholster, 5 of the 7 that played meaningful minutes last season. Cade Tyson graduates out of eligibility as well as Langston Reynolds. So those are 2 massive holes to fill, but we'll get to who might fill those roles later. Really like Osama coming back. He's a Minnesota kid, so not a surprise necessarily, but he is a pretty solid defender. And I think this year with a larger role, just with ball handling, his 3-point shot still needs some work. So I'm sure that'll be a point of emphasis in the offseason. But I thought he did a really nice job for the most part, keeping the Gophers in games with sometimes with his defense, sometimes being able to get to the basket. He's just a big, strong physical guard that you got to have in the Big Ten. Bobby Durkin, after kind of a slow start, really came on as a 3-point shooter. I mean, down the stretch, he was pretty automatic as far as 3-point shooting goes. And, definitely improved his defense. His start to the year definitely looked like he was going to be too slow. His feet weren't quick enough to play at this level. When they had to go zone, you saw them cover up a little bit of that, and he did a good job, and he actually rebounded better than one might expect for someone who's not the most athletic player on the court. Jalen Crocker-Johnson comes over with Nico from Colorado State and has an outstanding year, averaging 13 points and almost 7 rebounds a game before he had a foot injury that ended his season about a month early. That was really too bad because the Gophers were playing pretty good basketball when he was on the team or when he was playing. And I think he's probably the most important piece coming back just to provide that toughness and some scoring ability. Again, his 3-point shooting wasn't great this year, but he had some really impressive moments and games when they needed him. I think him getting back to playing at the 4 position will help him as well, as he had to play out of position a lot of the year when Robert Vaihola went down with an injury. And then Grayson Grove also, when the season started and I saw them in a scrimmage, I didn't have high expectations for him. I just felt like maybe he was just a little bit not strong enough, but I think his strength improved during the season, which is really impressive. And he became a very valuable kind of, lunch pail guy, like getting rebounds and making good decisions. He's a really good passer out of that high post that the Gophers like to run. So, I think he'll probably come off the bench next year, but don't be surprised if, they need him. Obviously, he's comfortable stepping into a starting role, has to work on his free throw shooting. That was a major issue this year. I think if he can do that and be a little bit more of an offensive threat, he becomes a pretty solid player because defensively and rebounding and passing, he's quite good and quite skilled. And then freshman Kai Shinholster, who came off the bench, appeared in 31 games, averaged about 13 minutes per game. I actually thought defensively for a freshman, he was pretty strong. And, there's some offensive limitations that he had as a freshman, but you usually see that bigger jump freshman to sophomore year. And I think, bringing him back is a good sign that even though he didn't start, maybe didn't play as much as he would have wanted, it was definitely more than he would have got had the Gophers been fully healthy. So, there's something about Nico's personality that these players seem to like and they buy in. And in this era of college basketball, they get 5 guys returning from last year's team. I think is a really good sign. They'll return 60% of their total minutes from last year with those players coming back. So high level of continuity. Who do they have coming in to replace Cade Tyson and Langston Reynolds primarily? They went over to Michigan, conference opponent, deep, obviously very talented Michigan team that won the national title, and grabbed 6'7" Winters Grady. From what I've read and heard, this is a kid that there was a lot of hype on. A lot of Michigan fans were excited about him, and he just didn't get a chance to play. He was playing behind Roddy Gale and Namari Burnett and Yaxel Lendenborg, so it's just hard to find him minutes. But he sounds like a pretty good three-point shooter, and he's a big athletic wing, a lot like Cade Tyson. So look out for him as a sophomore to maybe come in and fill that void. And then they added some size with Malik Cordell, also from Michigan. He's a German, and he played behind Adai Mara and Merez Johnson on the inside. So going to work every day against those guys in practice should help him. He's not maybe the most skilled guy at this stage, so he's kind of a development project. He'll also be a sophomore, but you can't teach size. And in the Big Ten, as we saw with how big Michigan was, and Illinois and Purdue and Michigan State, you got to have size. The Gophers went out and tried to get one. I think these two are kind of like buy low type of portal gets. Not a lot of, high, they weren't highly ranked in the transfer portal, but, in Nico we trust, right? Another one that we added, which was kind of a no-brainer, I think even Shooter over at the Pioneer Press brought this one up months ago, but Nolan Groves from Orono, he goes to Texas Tech his freshman year, again, playing behind some pretty talented players, but I was a little surprised at how little time he did play. He got some minutes when they played Duke and their upset over Duke earlier in the year because of some foul trouble, but overall he averaged only about 5 minutes a game. But he's got the Big Ten size. He's a 6'5", very well put together guard. Again, he'll be a sophomore. So one thing you see with Nico's transfer portal gets, these 3 so far will be sophomores, and I think he's hoping he can keep them around for at least another year and build that continuity. And then the last one that he brought in was Kyan Evans, which again was kind of a no-brainer. He played with him at Colorado State, got a big payday to go to North Carolina after Colorado State almost went to the Sweet 16. And Kyan Evans, much like Cade Tyson at North Carolina, just didn't get a lot of time, didn't really fall in love with Hubert Davis's system, and seemed to struggle at North Carolina, even getting, he started the season starting and then he came off the bench, just seemed to lose some confidence, didn't seem to fit in. But I think Nico knows Kyan Evans and vice versa. And I think this is going to be something where you're going to see another like resurgence. Evans is only 6'2" guard, so he's not real big. He's not as physical as Asama is. But I think when you think about, you got Asama returning and you got Kai Shinholzer returning, plus Nolan Groves with some strength and some size, that backcourt, there's a little bit of belief and hope and development that they're going to have to go through this year. But that's the idea here that the Gophers are putting together. Who left the team? Chauncey Willis Jr. transferred to Kent State. Nehemiah Turner, who hardly played, going to Jacksonville. BJ Omot never played in a regular season game, so not a big loss there, but he's also entered the transfer portal, spent the whole year injured. And then, of course, Cade Tyson and Langston Reynolds out of eligibility. So losing those guys, obviously Tyson and Reynolds were huge for the Gophers all season. I mean, just Iron Men, playing tons of minutes, doing it on both ends of the court. Cade Tyson, the primary scorer, 3-point, getting to the basket, back cuts. Reynolds ended up being the de facto point guard a lot of times, facilitating, not a great shooter, obviously struggled at the free throw line and the 3-point line. So I think you're exchanging, Evans for Reynolds, which Evans is going to be a little bit more of a true point guard, much better shooter, but you're losing some of that defensive and rebounding and toughness that Reynolds provided. I think the biggest challenge this year is going to be keeping the names straight. Let's be honest. You got Grayson Grove, Nolan Groves, Nolan Anderson, incoming freshmen. So this is a stat keeper's nightmare You got plural, singular, Groves, Nolan passing to Nolan. It's gonna be a lot of confusion. Mike Grimm's got his work cut out for him, but hopefully they can keep it together here a little bit. Just thought that was kind of a fun, a fun coincidence with all these names. So speaking of Nolan Anderson, freshman class coming in. Nolan Anderson, 6'7" wing out of Wayzata. I when I watched him play, I do see a little bit of Cade Tyson there as well. So you got Winters Grady coming in as a sophomore. Nolan Anderson will be a freshman, similar size, similar players. Obviously, it takes a little while as a freshman to come in and contribute. So I don't expect Anderson to be getting big minutes early, but it'll be interesting to see how the depth shakes out, and maybe his development as the season goes along. Same with Cedric Tomes, Eastridge high scoring guard. Very small, again, a little bit like Kyan Evans, maybe 6'1", pretty slight, but this kid can fill it up. And Tomes is a playmaker. He's a scorer. He's got really tons of range. So that'll be, again, where you can play him on defense will dictate how much he plays. His team in high school, he drew a ton of attention. There weren't a lot of weapons around him. So whether that was by design in terms of his shooting and scoring and playmaking, it felt at times that he was kind of the only one going. So, when you put him on a team where he's got a lot of other pieces and he's got more space and room to operate, maybe things will actually look a little bit easier or open up a little bit more for him. But the challenge for him, I think, is definitely going to be on the defensive end. And then the Gophers are also bringing in 6'10", I believe, freshman Chadrick Myope from California. Big wingspan, this big project here. So the Gophers, I think, are hoping that between Cordell from Germany, the transfer from Michigan, and Myope, that they have some size here and some depth. Again, it's always tough to count on young big guys, just footwork, and they tend to foul a lot when they're younger. So these are going to be developmental projects, but they're going to need one of those two to step up and probably start, so that you can bring Grove off the bench to play either the 4 or the 5, and Crocker Johnson can start at the 4. But you can always go, they might go a little smaller at times too, with Grady and Durkin and Crocker Johnson with 2 guards. So just some flexibility there. But I think the thing I take from the Gophers transfer portal and incoming freshmen is that there's going to be some work that has to be done this summer. And I think, the Gophers proved that last year. The coaching staff got that team much better. They were way more competitive than anybody would have thought, especially considering they were down like 4 of their top 5 guys going into the year. No Willis, Viola, those 2 are out. Omot didn't play a game. And then at the end of the year, you lost Crocker Johnson. So, they maintained a competitiveness throughout the season, and actually played some of their worst basketball early, and they continued to get better. And Medved just seemed to bring in the right kind of guy. So we'll see how it shakes out this year. A lot of summer, a lot of off-season work to go through yet, and the transfer portal's still open. I think the plan is to maybe sign one more guy. Just a reminder, Cade Tyson didn't sign last year until June, so guys were still out there, and they were able to pluck him at the end, and he ended up being the leading scorer on the team, almost averaging 20 points a game. So guys are still out there. Quickly at St. Thomas, big losses for the Tommies. They had high expectations this year, don't make it to the NCAA tournament. They finished the regular season second in the Summit League, but they lose top scorers Nolan Minasale, Nick Janowski, Isaiah Arugu Johnson. So they're going to be replacing a lot of scoring off that team. Minasale goes to Marquette. He's from Wisconsin originally. And then Nick Janowski, haven't seen where he's signed yet. And then Johnson Arugu, also to the transfer portal. They did get one guy in, and that's a DePaul transfer named Jeremy Lorenz, 6'8" forward, but did not play most of last season due to a hip injury. So that's the update on the Tommies. Should be an interesting offseason for them. Big losses in the scoring column, but don't bet against John Tower and the Tommies in that Summit League race for next year. That's my quick update on the transfer portal for the local D1 men's basketball teams, Minnesota and the St. Thomas Tommies. All right, that's the show for today. I want to thank Andrew from the West Central United AAU program out of Alexandria, Minnesota, for being here and for the great conversation we had. Big game this week for the Wolves Nuggets, game 6 in Minneapolis. More transfer portal news coming, and expect a few different types of shows. I've been really Wolves heavy lately, but I think we'll get back to some more of the coaching conversations here. We'll talk a little bit about pickup basketball here in the next couple of weeks, and just try to continue to bring that different flavor, different perspective on the game of basketball in the state of Minnesota and around the upper Midwest. But I appreciate you all listening. Make sure you follow, subscribe, leave a review if you wouldn't mind, and enjoy the rest of your week. This has been the Splash City Basketball Podcast.
Back in that bag again.